If you had taken a peek at my YouTube watch history 5 years ago, you would have seen a bunch of videos from different sorts of expats living in Japan, living in Korea, living in Taiwan. And you would have realized throughout all of these videos that the one dominating thing that they all share is travel abroad. But as a young woman, it can be quite intimidating to have those thoughts. I'm actually very proud to say that now I've been solo traveling in Asia for the past 2 years, and I've been living in Taiwan and also Korea for the most part of that. I will 100% agree with you that this is one of the scariest and most daunting things a woman can do in her lifespan. But now I honestly get a little bit annoyed when I talk to my friends at home and they're like, I could never do what you're doing. Because I know they could. I know it's just their fears, then internalized fears that are holding them back. So if you're also being shackled by your own fears of traveling, or if you really want to move abroad but you don't know how to make it work, this is my pep talk for you. Hi there, and welcome to the Muckcast, a cozy listen to pair with your coffee. I'm Hannah. I'm the Austrian version of Carrie Bradshaw living in Taiwan with an espresso amaretto and a Gen Z mindset. I write articles on Medium where I cover everything from music to psychology as a woman living abroad, and I share tidbits of my life on Threads and on Instagram. Here, I read my stories aloud with a few fresh reflections and insights along the way. So grab your mug, settle in, and let's get into today's piece. The article I want to explore for today is a little bit different from what I usually do, but I guess a little more tied into my daily life. I want to talk to you today about female solo travel and gendered fear. Because again, a couple years ago, my biggest dream was to move abroad. I love traveling, I love learning new languages, and I always wanted to go to Asia. I remember the first time that I watched Spirited Away when I was 3 years old. It's one of the only memories I have from that time because I was really, really young, but I just vividly remember sitting in my aunt's living room and seeing this movie from the first time and being so enchanted and also mesmerized by the fact that no one around me could explain this movie to me because Japanese culture wasn't something that my family in Austria was very familiar with. So I always wanted to move abroad and travel a lot, and yet, even though with my family I did travel a lot, it can sometimes be a little bit daunting for a woman to want to travel or even move abroad. But honestly, my take is that a lot of the fears that women face are actually produced by our society. And I don't think they should be something that holds you back. Of course, you should be cautious, but I think women are urged to be so cautious that it kind of overshadows our ability to be brave and step out. So with this podcast episode, I'm referring to an article that I wrote in January this year when I was solo traveling one round through Korea. And this was after I'd stayed in Korea for the past 5 months as an exchange student. Honestly, that was one of the toughest months for me to solo travel because I had huge luggage that I had to drag around. I was essentially already completely out of energy after the finals in the university and then traveling with my parents to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand, and then I went to Korea, and I didn't have my life together, so it was difficult. But still, I felt like all of the experiences and every day that I was living through, going through the circle around Korea, was so valuable and something that I will treasure forever in my life. Even if like from now on out, I would know that I can never travel abroad anymore, these would be the things that I would like want to tell my kids, my grandkids when I get old. I want to be that nursing home grandma who gossips and tells her cool stories. And I think while other people go out and party and then they tell their grandkids about all the crazy drunk stories that they have, I want to be the grandma who tells stories from Korea, who tells stories from Taiwan. I just hope that I will be the grandma in the nursing home who can tell the cool and crazy travel stories from different cultures and all the mishaps and problems that I ran into that were so full of learning. So I really want to embrace this time, especially in my 20s where I can travel so much. Yeah, so I want to read the article Female Solo Travel and Gendered Fear, the collective advice from a brave girl based on 2 years abroad. And this article will be linked below. You can find it in the info box below. If you click the link, You can not only read the entire script that I will be reading, more or less. I add things in between the lines, but this is the basic article. But you can also use this article to make highlights. So if you find something very interesting or you want to put something on your second brain, you can highlight it right in the article. And you can also leave some comments for me if you would like to give me some feedback. And an additional goodie for the link below is you can also click on the play button and you can listen to the article again without the podcast. So you could listen to an AI voice read the original article to you if you prefer that. But let's jump into today's piece. Female solo travel is a popular, empowering way for women to explore the world. That is the premise under which setting out into the world as a woman specifically is being sold. In many resources, it is thus also treated as almost a separate category from simply solo traveling or just traveling. Something tells me that the word empowering doesn't appear when a man travels the world alone. Solo travel for all genders is marketed as mind-opening, jumping beyond your comfort zone, or maybe just getting inspired. Why does female solo travel sound so much more like a one-on-one fist fight with a saber-toothed lion? I argue that just as much as gender is a societally learned behavior rather than a biological sex, and I'm side-eyeing and praying to Judith Butler here, who is the godmother of this concept of gender versus sex, female solo travel is, I think, a symptom of our socialization. And I would go even so far as to say that fear around solo travel is a deeply female fear. Now I will explain to you the socialization of fear. In my third short-term home of choice, Seoul, South Korea, I have lots of conversations with scared female travelers over their safety. They discuss the logistics of being home before sundown. They tell me about the requirements of hotel rooms. They tell me about their alignment of their schedules so they can walk home together to avoid being out on the streets alone. And they raise an eyebrow when I mention that a nice cafe in the small alley is just 5 minutes away. The reason being that they have this ingrained mindset that you cannot walk outside at night in a small alley alone, even if there is a nice cafe. So they're kind of asking, who the fuck am I to walk into a small dark alley all alone as a woman living abroad? Basically, I think they believe I am suicidal. That must be the answer. And it surely is the conclusion that many of my friends are coming to. Ironically, it doesn't matter where a woman is from. They will always think that I'm being overly brave or daring or suicidal. It doesn't matter if they're from the tumultuous suburbs of Paris or the comforting solitude of Dongbei, China, or if they are from the relative safety of Oslo. They commonly are scared of the following things. First of all, they're scared of dark alleys. Second of all, they're scared of groups of men. And third of all, they're scared of time spent alone. After having spent a lot of time abroad, most of it utterly alone, and also spending my life in countries where I don't even speak the local language, I've learned to tackle all three of the above with a smile of acceptance and accomplishment. And I want to say this again. The three things that I think are ingrained in women to be scared of, and it's for good reason, but it's being overutilized, I would say, is dark alleys. We're always told to never go into dark or small alleys because that's where you're going to get raped. We're told to be scared of groups of guys. I get that. In Austria, on the streets at night, I am also scared of groups of guys. Time spent alone in and of itself is not threatening. So the problem that I have with these three categories is they're just thrown around generally. In general terms, these three rules are supposed to be obeyed by women. If you look at these three things in combination, you will realize that if you obey these three rules, you are bound to leave the house only at certain times with certain people and in certain circumstances. Basically, you're shackling yourself to your house, which is where I'm coming from with this societal concept of fear. And I will dive into that more now. The fear of traveling alone as a woman, which I've supposedly somehow overcome, is actually just a projection on the wall for me. For the longest time, I was unaware that there were such huge discussions around women traveling alone in general. I'd assumed that this was limited to certain regions of the world, which honestly makes more sense to me, because that would be a very specific case or a very specific circumstance, so for your safety's purpose, you had better do one or another thing. But in the relative safety of East Asia, I meet so many travelers, and especially women, who congratulate me for my bravery, and it just makes me chuckle and shake my head in denial. Even my friends back home in Austria pat me on the back saying, I could never do what you're doing. Yet I know for a fact that they totally could. There are two possible reasons, though, why they actually don't go and travel. The first one is because they don't want it enough. And the second one is because they have trained fear of the novelty that comes with travel, especially as a woman. The relativity of danger. I want to mark that this is not me belittling women's experiences abroad. Like if a woman has had a horrible experience traveling abroad, then I'm very sorry for that, and I'm not negating these experiences. I'm just trying to show you that danger is a very relative thing. And by making fear a blanket statement, or making us women as a whole fearful of certain situations, we're just being imprisoned. The irony is that the amount of advice for safety amongst female travelers is not directly related to the actual criminal record of the area or representative of how dangerous holidays in that country actually are. It is rather directly related to how many women want to go to a certain country and thus search the term female solo travel XY country. And that is saddening to me because it means that thanks to the algorithms and the availability of content under the search term female solo travel, these women go on a journey and they get more information on how to protect themselves as they travel rather than they get actual travel tips of the area. I regularly giggle about videos advising girls how to stay safe in South Korea, which is something portrayed as the home of rape and sexual assault. I know sexual assault is relatively high in Korea compared to other crimes, and there is a history in Korea of horrendous killing incidents of women. I know when people think of crimes in Korea, they often think about like photo taking, upskirting, or for instance, they think of cameras in hotel rooms. And yes, these are all, I guess, valid claims. But to be honest, I've been living there for 6 months. I've traveled there twice outside of these 6 months, and I never had any of these issues. So I don't want to say it doesn't happen, but I just think that the amount of videos online that are basically showcasing how scared you should be is exponentially higher than the actual threat. But I bet that most people, if they compared Korean rape rates, especially on foreigners, to their home country, they would find that they are actually far more unsafe at home. And this is what I was talking about with relativity of danger. Yes, in Korea, rape rates are relatively high, but relative to what? Relative to Korea's crime rates of other crime domains. There's a lot more rape in Korea than there is pickpocketing. But if you compare the total numbers of rape to the total numbers of rapes in other countries across the globe, you will find that it's not that significantly different. But it just looks more crazy compared to the other crimes, because the other crime rates are so low. Of course, that doesn't take away from those bad incidents where things did happen. I've seen so many videos of how to ideally triple lock your door in a hotel room as a female traveler that I really can't see it as anything else but fear-mongering. Yes, bad things happen everywhere and anytime. But I can't help but find it treacherous that these female-centric fears receive so much advocacy online. In my eyes, it is often based on societally conditioned fears induced in women or an abstract replay of indoctrinated stereotypes. These conditioned fears are what hold many women back from taking the first step to broaden their horizons, which further locks them into their native patriarchal societal norms. I honestly have never triple locked my door in my hotel room. I haven't tried any of those crazy chair under your door tricks. I've never looked for bugging devices in my hotel room in Korea and in general. Call me naive, but I think if I live fearful like that, things are actually more likely to happen. And I want to emphasize that here that I am purposefully traveling and living in Asia and Europe as a woman. I can pass judgment on other regions, and I would be curious to hear about other opinions. Being alone, especially as a traveler in the world, can be a scary thing to do for men and women alike. But it certainly doesn't have to be. I firmly believe that the more fearful you walk through the world, the more likely things are actually going to happen to you. I am in no way denying the horrible things that can happen to a woman abroad. But as someone who has been abroad for a fair bit, none of my personal experiences support the need to triple lock your door. Confidence and the last step metaphor. Confidence is something that is a hard process of growth for all humans, but especially for women. We are conditioned to participate in a system that we are painfully aware keeps us locked in a suppressed position, where we constantly need to prove that yes, a woman can do the job too. Weirdly, I find that female solo travel is advocated for, but it is also treated like this huge and effortful step, when really it's no harder than any other thing a woman does in her life. I'd like to compare it to a staircase. Every step on the staircase is the same in height and difficulty and in the expense of energy it takes to conquer it. Some staircases are longer, thus it takes more energy. But the simple rule that is always true amongst all flights of staircases is that somehow, despite it not being higher, the last step feels more effortful. And why is that? Not because it is different in any capacity from all the other steps. Not even because you burned out already, because that depends on the number of steps you walked and not on the last stair in and of itself. But because your brain knows this is the last one. And thus it assigns a subjective effort to the last step. Had someone told you that you have to walk another 3 steps and then suddenly you were done early without anticipating it, I bet the last step would be fairly easy. It all lies in something that I call the anticipated effort, the closing in on the goal, or the reaching of the top of the staircase. And I think it's the same principle that applies to female fears. If you don't view female solo travel as something effortful and scary, like the last step that takes all of your energy, likely it won't be so bad. That is why women who travel alone always seem to be brave. They never try to be brave, push themselves over some sort of step in an effortful endeavor. Most solo traveling women I know just ignore the supposed dangers and disregard them, even laughing about them. They don't see this last step as any different, thus it doesn't feel any harder. Not because they overcame an obstacle, but because they never regarded these fears as so important as to hold such a primary position. That is why the girls who ask me about how I am so brave never fail to surprise me with near-death scenarios that I've never heard about, that I never even came close to on my travels, luckily. Maybe I'm lucky, or maybe I just don't care enough to be scared. The female solo traveler Socrates. I moved to Seoul 5 months ago and was given 5 sweet roommates aged between 20 and 23 from all across the globe. Though they were raised in most diverse backgrounds, they speak different languages and they have vastly different experiences before setting out on their journey to Korea, they all agree on one thing. They all agree that going out alone is not a good idea. In fact, it is hella scary. But since I've been doing just that permanently for 2 years, and I'm also the oldest in this weird little family, I've taken the obscure role of the advice giver, which is something I'm oddly unfamiliar with, despite the fact that I really have very little advice to give that they would be willing to take. Let's say I got a crash course in how to deal with watching people make mistakes you anticipated and yet be there for them after. I find it deeply ironic when my German roommate tells me over coffee that she would also like to have the confidence to walk around alone sometimes. She told me she was trying to practice this skill and wanted some advice from me on how she could reach more independence. The honest answer I could have given her was pain. Not because of the walking outside part, but because of the alone part. I explained my independence as a result of introversion and living abroad for 2 years. It's kind of a necessity. I promised her she would soon reach the same point if she wanted to, and it really was just a matter of getting out there. A few days later, another roommate asked me about how I could be so confident. Due to the nature of our conversation, which always takes place in the door frame before either of us takes a shower, I just gave her a very quick answer. I said, fake it till you make it. This was actually much closer to the truth if you add to it that you can actually prepare yourself by bringing things that you know will distract you and you will not feel so alone, like a book, some music, or you can frankly bring some work to the cafe to distract you from being alone. Both of my advice sessions that you've just heard are definitely components of the truth, which is you become more daring by daring to go outside alone first. And when you are alone, you fake the confidence until you actually become confident. There really is no magic to it. And despite that, personalities such as levels of extroversion also determine how much time alone you might need and how your adventures will be looking. But one thing makes me universally angry across all of the conversations that I've recently had with different women commenting on my independence. None of their concerns seem to be connected to the actual reality of the danger that they were faced with. Can you hear the cat? This cat was already part of the gang last week. And I really thought that by recording at 3 a.m. in the morning, I could avoid the cat, but the cat is back. That girl is so determined. Honestly, props to her. Yeah, she just wanted some affirmations. Fear is relative. Crime rates across the world. Living in South Korea is generally relatively safe. And the meaning and emphasis on the word relative here is quite important. Here's what I mean in a little mental experiment. Let me tell you why criminality and female fear are clearly not correlated in the context of Vienna, New York, Taiwan, and Seoul. Let's begin with Austria for this example. I was born in Austria and I lived in Vienna for quite a while. It is a relatively safe city with few criminal neighborhoods and generally low crime rates, and it generally has a pretty good image. If you watch the news, your attention might be grabbed by the frequent occurrence of sexual assaults or even femicides, because in fact, Austria has some of the highest numbers of femicides each year in the whole of the EU. I know, crazy, right? Just last year, 10 men in their teens and 20s who had sexually assaulted an abducted girl of the age of 12 were deemed innocent by the Austrian court because the girl had supposedly made inconsistent statements. That might make your feeling of safety crumble a little bit, doesn't it? I know all of these things and would still not stray away from walking through Vienna streets at night because while female-related crimes are quite high in Austria, it is my home and I feel relatively safe. Despite the fact that there are gangs of men on the side of the street who catcall and do things, that doesn't stop me from walking down the street. But it definitely makes me a little uncomfortable, and it definitely makes me more aware of my surroundings. In 2022, I went to New York for a bit over a month. I was there completely alone on a self-organized internship, commuting between Queens and downtown Manhattan every single day. I was painfully aware of the relatively high crime rates in New York compared to Austria, especially the neighborhoods that I was going through. I knew the worst areas and I had heard plenty of news from women being abducted amongst other incidents. Yet I still walked around alone at night, for one, because I got the confidence as I stayed there, and secondly, because it's not feasible to evaporate into thin air the moment the sun goes down. It just takes some getting used to figure out the rhythm of a city, and clearly it wasn't super safe to walk around alone at night, so I was trying my very best to stay in the safer areas. Isn't it crazy that a woman has to plan those things? That's insane if we think about it, that half the population has to have a fear of avoiding their surroundings for at least 10 hours a day. Women can do many things, but we can't evaporate into thin air, unfortunately, and honestly, we shouldn't even need to. I did have sticky incidents, though, while I was in New York. Once, I got off on one stop too late on the subway and I had to walk home the extra subway stop in the dark through some uninhabited and dimly lit streets of Queens. I should refer to it as a walk, but my heartbeat and steps were so quickly, it was much more like a run, to be honest. And I was so hyper aware of every car around me and whether they sped up or slowed down, it was nerve-wracking. A terrifying incident also happened when I was on the subway line in, and I was waiting for it to keep going into the final stop, which was my stop, where I had to get off at Ditmars Boulevard, in case you know the area. On an in-between stop, another passenger a few rows in front of me got up and frankly screamed through the entire car, "You're all fucking assholes! I have a gun, I'm gonna shoot you all!" He pointed into the air with no gun in his hand, but as a European in the US, you are truthfully never sure about people making such statements, because he could have a gun, right? I was dead silent and the situation just passed, but it is safe to say that I was scared down to the marrow of my bones. These incidents are when I quickly learned the direct effect of crime rates on individuals, and that relatively elevated levels might clearly impact any humans, and not just women's, ability to live safely. Now we switch countries again. Years later, I sat on the side of a country road next to the ocean in Taiwan. I was completely alone. I was waiting for a bus in the pitch dark at a lonely bus stop in the middle of freaking nowhere. The street lamp flickered alive as a female police officer came by to ask me whether I was fine. I answered that I was alright, just waiting for the bus. She stayed with me until the bus came and I made my way home. And when I arrived, I told my friend about how kind the police officer had been. But my friend answered, "Oh my god, of course she needed to stop and help you. You clearly needed help. I mean, it's her job to help people, and you were completely alone in the dark at a place where nothing else was and nobody was going to come. Weren't you scared?" And I honestly just laughed at that. For some background, she's a Filipino girl from Quezon City, which is near Manila. Having been to Manila, I can tell you that it's not a place I want to run around alone at night in. It's not just a subjective feeling, but also reflected in high crime rates, as compared to Taiwan, and especially Taiwanese countryside. Yet, I found it funny. She was scared for my safety in Taiwan, a country with some of the worldwide lowest rates of criminality, and the friendliest, most helpful people in the world. Despite her living in Taiwan with me and knowing as well as I that the safety feeling here doesn't compare to anywhere else in the world, she still projected her background and fear conditioning onto my situation. But if we talk numbers, crime probabilities, and realities, that was not a realistic fear or realistic need for her to be so scared from me. But it was just a way for a woman to show care for another woman through propositions of fear. That's something that makes me feel so incredibly safe and happy in this country, because I know I can leave the house at any time of day and night. I don't have to worry. I'm so fine at walking around in Taiwan at night, even in huge cities. There's many reasons for why I'm staying in Taiwan, but one of them is it's so safe for women here. It is so nice to be a woman and walk around at night and not have to have second thoughts. At the time of writing this article, I lived in Seoul. And on my first day of uni, we got an instruction how to act in case of emergencies, including emergencies of sexual assault. Western exchange students, it appears, are painfully aware of the relatively high numbers of sexual assaults in Korea, relative to Korea's numbers of other crimes. And the last point of what relative to what is high is what tends to be missed by most of the people. So my roommates on the way home could talk of nothing but how they didn't go into dark alleys, or how they wanted to seek out friend groups to walk back together, or how they planned avoiding darkness. And I frankly laughed out loud next to them. A girl from Brazil and a girl from Paris, right next to me, were having a conversation about Seoul as if they had just entered Mordor. However, the fact is that relative to their own hometowns, they were far safer in Seoul than they were at home. You see, relativity is of pivotal importance in this case, especially because the relationship between fear and criminality actually has 3 dimensions that can be viewed relative to one another. First of all, you can compare relative criminality across countries. You can compare crime rates from the US to a crime rate in Seoul, for instance. Or you can compare relative crime rates across different domains of criminal acts. You can compare theft to sexual assault, for instance. Or you can compare criminal rights relative to personal experiences. And that is what most of these women are doing. They're comparing this experience of being told how to behave in Korea to stay safe to how people in their country would instruct them to stay safe. But the crime rates are different, and the likelihood of a problem is different. Let's talk more about brave women and the intelligence of fear. Now, fear is a natural human reaction that has protected our ancestors from getting killed by accident or just dying prematurely. Thus, fear is a survival mechanism. Female caution, or female fear as I would label it, however, is not a survival mechanism. It is a societal process of conformity to patriarchal norms. And at the same time, it is a method of self-preservation for many women living in places with high crime rates. If a man is brave, he's just that. He's a brave man. He's an achiever, a goal-getter, maybe somebody with a destination in mind, and that means that he will get there. If a woman is brave, there is almost like an aftertaste to it. We tell little girls that they are brave to equal the playing field to their male counterparts, or to avoid the stereotypical word pretty. Brave women can also achieve goals, but sometimes it is deemed to be done in a societally distasteful way. Sometimes we even attach feelings of naivety or ignorance to women that we label with the simple term brave. We rarely marvel at a woman we call brave without actually pointing towards other qualities or even problems she might have. It almost feels like brave is enough for a man, but it's not enough for a woman. In many instances, it makes sense. Being blindly brave could, and sometimes during some decades, might actually get you killed as a woman. But this doesn't legitimize that fear or gives it any purpose. In fact, this calls specifically to defy the principle of female fear, and female solo travel is a good place to start defying your fear. In the world we live in today, we have choices of whether to comply by natural urges of our bodies or use them to our benefits. By no means do I mean that you should walk through the world pretending that you're fearless, because A, there is biological evidence that this is not healthy, and B, fear is useful to elongate your life, or at least retain a certain level of comfort and safety. But we women have really learned to apply fear overly creatively, in that we use it as more than a survival mechanism. Living in Asia, for instance, I can see many girls using the notion of being scared as a mechanism to attract men. They try to look cute, try to fit in, and it honestly makes me gag, because that is not a principle I'm culturally used to from Austria. That is not how one screws over patriarchy, though. That is just how you apply for being screwed. All I'm trying to say is that the existence of the female fear to travel alone proves that it needs to be defied, not proliferated. Fear is not reality. The moral of the story is fear is induced by new situations, and the strength of the individual reaction to the novelty is predicted by how relatively unfamiliar you are with the presented moment. It's not about how fear-inducing the moment is, it's about how new is the experience to you. This has quite little to do with how statistically dangerous the situation really is for you, and even less with the reality you find yourself in, which is hard to anticipate in a foreign country unless you know the culture. And it is this fact that makes female solo travel an act of bravery, and yet also naivety, inevitably, just like any other sort of travel. If you weren't naive to what happens to you on a holiday, you wouldn't learn, and thus you wouldn't grow. Growth happens through resistance. So if you knew about what happened on a trip in advance, there would be no point in taking the plane in the first place, at least in my opinion. I'm not somebody who books a 5-star all-inclusive resort holiday. On top of that, Emma Watson recently explained in a podcast interview that feeling fear is not always negative. She said, and I quote here, "I used to always seek shelter when I felt scared. Now I realize that this feeling of stress and fear can also mean that something great is about to happen." That's literally what Emma Watson said on the Jay Shetty podcast. And I think Emma Watson was absolutely right. The best things in my life has always lain on the other side of fear. Call me naive, call me blind, or call me reckless. But I firmly believe that demonizing bravery in a woman is a mutter in the dark by those who are not brave enough. These people who never see the benefits of female bravery at travel are thus also the ones who might never seek and surely not reach the type of growth that you can get from traveling. I recently saw the 100th reel of a woman teaching how to ensure that a hotel room is quote unquote safe for women. The video was genuinely so scary to me that I developed paranoia after having traveled through Korea a whole month in many different hotels where I never checked any of these points. I watched this girl explain the likelihood of someone breaking in through the window and through the door, and then installing a chair against the door. Then she explained how to look for bugging devices, and she finished off with the importance of inspecting the dark room for blinking lights or for mini cameras. And I was humbled, scared, frankly. I got retrospectively scared of all the beautiful trips that I'd had and all the adventures I'd been on. And that is why I feel the need to record this podcast, because I honestly think they're not doing each other a good deed by emphasizing even further how quote-unquote scary this world is for women. It is dangerous, sure, but mostly this extra fear is a result of comparing the relative scariness of life between the life of a man and the life of a woman. We live in a patriarchal society, so of course the life of a man is always going to be less scary than that of a woman. I'm completely fine with you calling me naive for not triple locking my door and not bringing a blue light to my room to look for any evidence of criminal activities. Seriously, guys, this level of fear is clearly pathological at this level. I choose to lean into my fears, wherever safe and possible, and seriously, a day spent walking around alone should not be scary. In my opinion, the more we decide to bend those societally indoctrinated fears, the more we unlock the shackles of gender stereotypes. After all, no matter if you're a man or a woman, the only person you can truly trust is yourself. But if you're too afraid to go out with that one and only person you can be safe around, how can you call yourself free? Okay, that is my very long take on the female fear of travel. I'm just saying that a lot of the fear that is being constructed is constructed around women specifically, and it's just crazy that we live in a world where female fears are still so present and need to be present, but also are being proliferated so much on the media. Some tips that I can give you are basically to look into crime rates of the area that you're going to, and at the same time make sure to look into the crime rates of your home place. Is this place compared to your home actually scary, or is it not scary? I personally will say, however, that I've stopped giving much of a damn because there's two things. There's the official crime rate, and then there's the shadow number of incidents. In many countries, you cannot anticipate that. I really think you should take that step and travel. And if you are scared of traveling, or it is your first time traveling, don't drive yourself nuts over crime rates or incidents that happen in those countries. The more you know about a place, the more safe you are too. So that is maybe also something you can take into consideration when planning your trip. Everybody has their different recollections of life abroad, and it's so important and so valuable to travel. It would be really a loss to not do it. Thanks for granting me access to your ears on the Mugcast. You can read more of my writing on Medium under Hannah's Cafe or Hug in a Mug, or you can follow me on Instagram or Threads at hugin.amug for cozy content and updates. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow the podcast, share it with a fellow coffee lover, and let me know what to read next in the comments. Hope to see you soon somewhere on Hannah's Cafe.